And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. This is a podcast for the entrepreneurial spirited, the curious, and those hungry to learn about the world around them. In it, we distill the ideas from the world's best thinkers in business, startups, psychology, history, sports, music, you name it. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the book Leap First by Seth Godin.
And we discuss how to make art out of your work, no matter what that work might be. We talk about how stories rule the world. We discuss how to gain credibility and how to defeat imposter syndrome. And so the question is, why is all this important? Well, finding a way to make our work into art is a great path to success and happiness. And because we all have an inner artist lurking inside of each of us. So you can find out more about Seth by checking out one of his many books, going to seths.blog and his podcast Akimbo. And as always, don't forget you can check out the full video from our episodes on YouTube. And if you enjoyed the episode, it would mean the world to us if you shared it with someone who might enjoy it. Here's something interesting that I thought about, or that struck me about Airbnb's IPO. Now I'm not in the kind of, the Silicon Valley startup scene or anything. And as far as I know, you're not either. But
are you waiting for a surprise that, I am?
I'm surprised.
I'm in San Francisco. Yeah.
But it's often that I don't know. I feel like some founders' reputations precedes them to some degree, even like pre-IPO. And I don't know who the founders are of Airbnb. I know that they're super famous, and I've heard the story about them. But it's quite interesting that a company like Stripe, for example, it's like the Collison brothers. And they're quite renowned. And now there's all this talk about Stripe kind of being the next Google and some of the huge things they're going to do. And they're not a public company. They're still very much a private company. And it's interesting. I wonder what that has to do with the kind of perpetual brand and perpetual growth of the brand that comes.
The celebrity of the founder, yeah.
The celebrity and the brand of the founder or founders themselves and how kind of out in the world they are themselves.
Yeah, it's I think it got to make a difference, particularly with like IPOs. It's sort of like it's a guessing game, and there's a little bit of scarcity, so people want in, and so I think that's right. It's a bit of a hype fest. You go around and hype the company up, and if you're a celebrity founder, you can do that pretty well, right? So I'm intrigued by what you said about Stripe, though. So they're an online payment gateway. What are they going to do?
This is the thing. I'm not in the click, so I have no idea. But
your sources are telling you.
You're obviously you're familiar with like Stripe and what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe explain it for anyone who doesn't know.
They provide like payment and transactional services similar to what you might expect from what PayPal might provide for companies, or what Square even provides for like point of sales operation businesses. And so where Stripe has really centered themselves is more from a developer's perspective. And so their API and their back-end, endpoints are incredible. They're like a developer's dream in terms of being able to implement what they provide. And so there's kind of been this big wave of momentum behind them because rather than, I guess, targeting more towards a consumer like PayPal might have, although PayPal's targeted initially towards, big reputable sellers. I can't remember what they call them on eBay. There's a particular
power sellers.
Power sellers, that's it. Yeah. That reminds me of Power Thirst. Do you remember Power Thirst? Did
No.
you ever see the Power
What's
Thirst
that?
videos? Oh, you need to Google that.
Google that. Oh, that's for after the show.
I'm not going to impersonate it, but that's definitely an after the show thing. And definitely something, it's just a space that we probably don't want to tread into, just the content of that show. So you can find it on YouTube though. It's, you don't have to go to any dark corners of the web, mate.
Okay, good.
So and so they've obviously hit it off in a big way because, you know, there's a lot of like now, you know, the tech celebrities around the world, which is quite a fascinating. It's very much a new thing, you know, like the celebrity from software. And it's like the new rock stars of our day and age to some degree.
Absolutely, the new Rockefellers or Edisons or whatever. So, tell me what we're going to talk about today. What book are we going to hit up? We are talking about Leap First by Seth Godin. And it is probably the smallest book that we've tackled in our show. And I love how small it is. Yes, it's
because
refreshingly
it means
small.
And there's no bullshit. Like,
yes,
it's just the content you need, and that's all that's there.
Yeah, and it definitely helps when you're trying to do 50 episodes a year on the books you're reading. To read a 2-hour book is a nice change.
Side benefit, yeah.
So I'll tell you about Seth. I mean, probably a lot of people know who Seth is, you'd think. He's a pretty famous guy, but we'll tell you a bit about him.
He is famous, but I wonder if he's broadly famous, like outside of because he's like the marketing guru. I wonder if he's like broadly famous outside of kind of the business clique, you know?
No.
I don't think he would be.
I agree. So just probably the stuff that I read about. Good pickup. So he was born in 1960. So he's about 60 years old. Mount Vernon, New York, United States he was born in. And he's kind of an awkward kind of kid. And he's kind of an eccentric dude, actually. So it kind of flowed through. But, you know, he's a very smart young man. He's a serial entrepreneur, effectively, is what he turned himself into. But he has a degree in computer science and philosophy from Tufts University. And then he went on to get an MBA from Stanford Business School. He got married to Helena Godin, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, in 1986. And he got cracking in the 90s making some companies. So he co-founded a company called Yo-Yo-Dine, which was like the early internet direct marketing online platform, which sold to Yahoo for $30 million in 1998. I'm not sure how much of that he took home, but it's fair to say he would have been doing okay. And after that, he sort of started writing books and getting into sort of spreading his ideas about marketing. But he also started another company called Squidoo. So he's a fan of these weird names, right?
Oh, he is. You're going to mention his books, but like every single thing that he names or can get a name on, he'll try and push the weirdness boundaries.
Yeah. So
have you heard of these companies, mate? Like I've never heard of them.
No, I've never heard of them. I don't think he's. My feeling is he's an entrepreneur, but he's more of a marketer. So like, I think he's done enough companies to let him do his other stuff. Is my read, and to get practical experience. So Squidoo was a revenue sharing article website, and it got up there it basically had I think it was founded around 2006 or 2008, and it had like a bit of a rise, and it got into the top 500 most visited websites in the world, and then went off the other side and ended up selling for not very much to hub pages. But he is a marketing guru. So he was an early proponent of direct marketing, which is like instead of brand marketing, which is more like what, say, Nike do, where they put ads on the TV and say, we're Nike, this is what we stand for, we're awesome, and then you just get a good feeling towards the brand. Direct marketing is kind of measurable. So it's sort of the kind of marketing where you might send emails to people and measure how many people click through. Direct marketing's like Facebook ads, where you can target it and then measure the response.
Well, case in point of that, mate, is seeing the rise of, so there was that wave of like newsletters, and every company has a newsletter, or every person almost now has a newsletter. And now that's been like put on steroids with the likes of Substack, where, you subscribe and pay money to join a newsletter group. So they basically just, put a payment gateway around articles that are within the kind of the premium area of Substack.
Right. I've never heard of that. That's interesting. What is Substack?
Think of it as Medium, right? So, on Medium, you're supposed to only get 3 articles to read per month, if you've used that before. And, people want to get views on their articles because they get paid per X number of views if they're part of this, the payment program, whatever it is. So, and the people that are funding it are the readers themselves who are paying for subscription to Medium. Whereas on Substack's a slightly different model, where the subscribers are subscribing to one newsletter.
Okay.
So there's one particular person's articles, or however many you want to subscribe to, but you're paying for every single one individually.
Interesting.
Very, very. And there's some like famous, we were talking about Airbnb earlier. One of the, I think it was the product, I think the chief of product or head of product previously from Airbnb is quite a famous guy, Lenny's newsletter on Substack. Some very good articles if you're interested in startups and the business world, by the way. And he's well and truly hit his, the famous 1,000 true fans now as a result of, purely doing newsletter send outs.
Cool.
It's crazy.
That's really cool. I never heard of it. I'll check it out. So, but Seth, so on that kind of theme of newsletters, he invented this concept called permission marketing in the early days of the internet. And basically what it is it sort of respects the consumer, and you build up goodwill with the consumer, and you don't ask them for stuff, you give them stuff. So he famously, which I'll get to, writes one of the most popular blogs in the world. And he's posted a blog up there every day since 2002. So he knows how to ship. And
I don't think I've brushed my teeth every day since 2002.
No.
In fact, I know I haven't.
No, neither. And so that's kind of permission marketing, where, you get people to know you, you put out your content, you say, hey, I'm not expecting anything here, but please have this. And if you like it, it'd be great if you'd come back again. And then after a while, when you do have something that you want to sell, you can say, look, I've got this thing, I've done it. If you think it might provide value to you, please, here it is, you can buy it, but you don't have to. I'm still going to keep doing this other stuff anyway. So, which, is quite a common thing now, but nonetheless, he's a master at it, and he kind of invented it. And while he's been writing his blog, he's been writing a heap of books too. So he's written almost 20 books over the last 20 years. So, and most of them are bestsellers. So, I mean, he wrote Permission Marketing in the late 90s, but then some people may have heard of Purple Cow, the book Purple Cow. And he's got other ones, the weird names like Free Prize Inside, Linchpin, This is Marketing, and Leap First. But he's got a really great way of kind of pulling together different themes and I suppose different stories together to explain a point, Ryan.
Yeah, he's how many have you read many of his books, mate?
I haven't actually.
No, either have I. But I imagine that I've done like a bit of reading of his blog, and you could just jump on and read any given article, and you'd be like, that was a different perspective. And almost every single blog post that I've read from him is written in that way. It's just a different take on reality almost. And he has a way of telling things. And this Leap First book is no different to that. Like the first scene in the book is about some strange animal that lives in at lakes and things and has a particular, what was that animal?
I think it's a lark. I think it was a lark or something. It's a type of bird. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I'm not a bird watcher, mate, so I'm not up. I'm not up with these things. And basically the story around how one lark sitting on one side of the lake will hear another lark on the other side of the lake and get scared off if it hears it call out too much, and you can like impersonate a lark and scare all the other larks away. And the point of that was to tell a story of, fear and, taking a leap type thing. But he just has this excellent way of framing things.
Yeah, he pulls together so many different ideas from different things and puts it through a single narrative, and it makes it really, really great to read his stuff or listen to him talk. And he's got a podcast, Akimbo, where you can kind of get an entry into that, which is a really good podcast. So that's kind of him. I mean, he lives in Hastings-on-Hudson, whatever that is, in New York. It's like a nice community outside of New York City. He has 2 sons and he lives with his wife. And he's been inducted into the Direct Marketing Hall of Fame and the Marketing Hall of Fame as well. Like he is a thought leader in this space.
Yeah. Mate, you said eccentric before. What made you say that? Other than the way he frames stories about larks.
He's just like, I don't know, just the way he talks. He wears interesting glasses. He's a quirky guy. He does things like he's obsessed with chocolate and like all the different types of chocolate and the beans, and he gets right into that. And he loves coffee but doesn't drink coffee. So he's obsessed with coffee but doesn't drink it. And just all these kind of esoteric, interesting hobbies that he has that just makes him a kind of different kind of cat.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the chocolate and the coffee because he's obsessed with both of those, and he's got a few other interesting obsessions, but he does not partake in them. So he's like, I'm obsessed with coffee, but I also drink probably too much coffee. And it's so fascinating that someone who's just so, interested in the kind of farm to cup process and the different beans and things can just not drink it. He's an interesting guy.
Absolutely. It's weird, but
he's an artist, mate. He's more of an artist
yes.
than what you said before as a businessman, I think. And I think he's like, it seems like after he finished his businesses, he had it was almost like a self-discovery or something, or maybe going through that, he had a bit of an awakening and came out the other side, and he's very much like an artist.
Absolutely. And I guess that's kind of what this book's about, I think, It's about kind of putting yourself out there and doing your work, and very much like War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which we did in an earlier episode. But that was probably my big takeaway from the book, was that, the concepts in there really talk about how to kind of approach your work like it was art. So where Stephen Pressfield's book's about pursuing creative outlets. I think Seth's book here is more about, okay, to be happy professionally, you need to approach your work as art, and you need to do your work and not worry too much about what others think, among other things. And goes into the depth of why that is and the stories we tell ourselves and those sort of things. How would you summarize the message or the narrative of this book?
See, I take War of Art with Pressfield. I take that as like totally in alignment with this book. I don't think either of them is talking about, the fine arts in, specifically, or, the very creative industries specifically. I think they're actually talking in far broader terms, like, going out and building a company, I think falls certainly within the realm of both of their messages. But I think, what they're trying to do, or certainly what Seth's trying to do, is frame it as though that whatever your work is, as long as there's, I guess, some sort of like human element to it, that turn it into an art and make it your art.
That's
if it aligns with who you are.
Art. I like that. I think that's a nice distinction. I think turn it into an art is what he's trying to say.
And I think the kind of the next logical step from that is it's pretty hard to turn something into art if you absolutely despise doing it. And I think that's where the leap element comes from.
Yeah, and the leap element is also around not giving a shit what other people think, which is easier said than done, but it is part of that. So I guess work as art, and the storytelling around what you do. And artists, by definition, are trying to push the boundaries and they're making you emote to something, and you don't have to like it. There's a risk in art. You're putting your work out there, and while you may, I think it's fair to say, you'd love it if people did like it, and that's the goal, is that people appreciate it. Well, that might not actually be true. Maybe the goal of the art is for someone to have a reaction to it, not necessarily to like it. But I think most people want their art to be popular. There's a real risk in that. And do you, as a accountant, as an engineer, as a coffee shop owner, as a bookkeeper, as a marketer, which is probably a traditionally creative industry, do you approach your work that way? I think that's a question that he sort of indirectly poses and challenges you with.
Yeah. As you're saying that, mate, I can't help but think, I think we've spoken about Van Gogh before, right?
Many. We've actually hit him up on many episodes, so
yeah,
that's good. We keep coming back to the well.
I keep coming back to him, and there's many artists in this category, but of course my shoddy memory is just not helping me at the moment, and so the thing with artists like Van Gogh is they almost weren't in it to, I'm hesitant to say this, like weren't in it at all to just get people to like it or get people behind it. They were just doing it because they needed to get something out. There was this internal need to do and create something.
I don't agree. I think that I think it's a bit more like this, that he needed to get something out. The letters he wrote to his brother, really kind of, he's kind of saying, fuck, I'm struggling here. No one likes this. Am I crazy? So I think there's sort of like this thing where it's like, I need to get this out. I really want people to like it. I want acceptance. I'm a human, right? But I don't care about that enough to stop doing this thing that I have to do.
Yeah. So, maybe temper what I say, mate.
That's that tension. I don't think it's like, I think it's like you still feel all those hard emotions of the outsider, the rejection, it's just they can push through that,
But he isn't necessarily doing it for like financial gain, although financial gain comes as a result of public affection for the art that he's created. So there's kind of there's a bit of a hand-in-hand thing there. But I certainly get the impression from those more traditional artists that it wasn't so much the, not being, say, financially successful. That wasn't so much of an issue for them. It was that public rejection comes from more their work hasn't been understood, or they've failed to articulate themselves properly through the work they're trying to create. And so there's potentially a really long-term horizon for which the work that they're creating gets recognized. And this maybe comes back to what we were talking about at the start of the episode, mate, where we were talking about like Coltrane or Davis or something, right? And you listen to something from Davis that he created in the 70s, and it sounds great, and it sounds like side by side with some things that are created even today, right? But back then it was just so far beyond what was going on. Now, understand that Davis, by that point in time, money didn't matter to him. It wasn't something that he had to worry about. But he was just on this like creative journey, and it didn't matter that the time horizon for which he was going to see public acceptance from that work, that he wasn't going to see that in immediately or in the next year or two. It was much later down the track where the broad acceptance happened. And I think there's been many artists that their work has become more famous after their deaths. Now, 100%. There's also arguments about like whether their death itself was part of a catalyst for the popularization of their work as well. Who knows?
It certainly creates scarcity.
And so I think, mate, that one thing that Godin's probably emphasizing in this book is maybe a little bit shorter term horizon. Like, he doesn't want necessarily you to create things that are going to return benefit in 30 years' time. Although I think it'd be good for it to continually build towards that. But I think you'd hopefully maybe see that you might put in effort for 5 or 10 years and really start to reap the benefits from that. It's like a shorter term horizon thing is what I felt.
Yeah, I think that like with an artist, it's the feeling of there's a bunch of competing priorities and emotions and the torture of doing something without the boundaries and it's kind of like how that all kind of comes together, and what you end up prioritizing and an artist tends to prioritize. Maybe we should bloody talk to some before we really put words in their mouths. But my feeling from reading about a bunch of them is that the creation is the most important thing, even if it's torturous that it's not liked or recognised. And then one day, the really great and popular artists, they end up breaking through, and some of the great ones don't, and you never heard about them. But they to get there, you've got to stick with your kind of new creative ways.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to agree there, mate. Yeah.
The point you made there around time horizons a really interesting one, because it kind of, this is something that I think he was posing in this book too, is sort of like, okay, show up, do the work, turn yourself into an artist of your field. So you need to do your work, you need to do it for you, and you need to tell yourself a particular story about it. And the story you choose to tell yourself about it will really determine if you really keep going or not. And a question that I found myself asking when I was listening to this was, how much of a hurry am I in? Because if you're in a hurry and you want something this year to kind of work out, you're not going to be doing your best, most creative work, or you probably won't even start, because you're going to need to have a lot of practice to get there. And, like we talked about with Danny Meyer, your career is a long career if you're lucky enough to stay alive through it. So you don't need to be in as much of a hurry as you think. We underestimate the amount of things that we can get done over the long term and the cumulative effects of doing something every day or every 3 times a week or whatever. So if you're in it for the long term and you start to expand those horizons, you're more likely to actually be able to, take a bit of a hit now, and you'll do it for long enough that you'll probably create a job for whatever you're passionate in. You'll create this great writing. You'll learn to play the guitar like a maestro if you're playing it for 15 years, twice a week. That's going to happen.
That's you, mate.
That's me. That's right. So unfortunately, I'm not quite at year 10. But, hey, I'm still practicing, so that's good.
You'll be there soon.
Exactly. So if you take the long-term view and be brave about it, you can do pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost, that's almost the tension, mate. It's like there's a tension between wanting to try and hit the ideal state of what you're kind of in that is your vision. And then there's like a practical reality, like, I need to get some food on the table type thing. And there's somewhere in the middle that you need to find in between those two things. Because there's many things that you can do to put food on the table. But the chances are, the closer that you are towards that end of the scale of, just putting food on the table, is, I suspect that, given enough time down the track, you won't have moved as far along that path towards a more creative vision on the other end, given a number of years. Whereas someone that's starting a little bit further towards what they want to try and achieve is obviously going to be a little bit further along.
So
I think that...
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
You go. And so I think that, mate, the challenge is in finding where to start along that curve. But I think, as you said, if you spend all of your time trying to work out where to start, you're not going to start at all. And I think this is a big, one of the classic procrastinations, or one of the classic lizard brain techniques that he actually mentions throughout the book. And he rattles off like this incredible list of, the lizard brain is actually thinking here moments throughout. But that was definitely one of them.
Absolutely. And a lot of that's generated because, if you want to be creative, this is something I took from the book too. If you want to be creative, don't expect other people to get on board. So if you're doing it solely so that you can get the adulation of the crowd, you will fail, because that's an outcome a long way down the track if you're lucky. You need to do it for you or for other reasons, and you've got to define success as showing up or whatever else. But it's got to be kind of an input, not about kind of the result of it, I guess.
Well, mate, the classic statement is it's that need. You need to get it out into the world. Or there's a burning desire or a burning attraction to whatever it is that you're trying to do in this space. I know that, Seth puts it in slightly different words. I think that's pretty close to like Pressfield's words. I know like Neil Gaiman talks about this. He's another famous like fictional writer, talks about a similar thing. It's like this burning need to get things out.
So if you're someone who, I think you've had this probably, where you're not really sure what that is, how do you go about, and you don't want to just keep, banging through on the 9 to 5 if you can avoid it, or you do, but you want to do something else on the side. How do you kind of find the fire?
You know what, mate?
Because that can be something that stops you.
100%. I think there's a really big thing here, right? In your younger years, like your 20s, certainly your 20s, I think the biggest bit of advice that I would give is go and do and try many different things, and like do all the high risk stuff then, because chances are you haven't got much to lose, and what you feel that depending on where you kind of what industry or area you're getting into, there's always this like incessant need that if you don't get in now, you're going to be behind in the race to who knows fucking where. And it's just simply not true. And it's quite interesting. You, even having worked beside people who might come back into the workforce after a number of years away, and you kind of look at them, you're like 5 years older than me, but we're kind of on the same level here. But then what happens is a couple of years down the track, those people have catapulted their way forward in whatever it is that they're pursuing, because they've had all this time to discover who it is that they are, by trying many different things and exploring different realms of the world or of different experiences and things that they can get involved with. And I think that's part of it, mate. So there's like this gaining experiences piece to like see different perspectives and try things on. But I think there's one other part, and that other part is there's the leap again, and the leap requires a bit of commitment. And again, maybe that's something. There's almost like that, like a beckoning commitment that calls from the 30s, I guess. As you get a little bit older, it's like, I need to get my shit together now. What is it? And I think being able to draw upon some of those experiences can certainly help in working out what that commitment is. And worst case scenario, right? If you did go and dabble and try lots of different things, even if nothing resonates, you know what doesn't resonate. And you just need to kind of move towards the things that resonate the most.
Kick
that's
up
the
some
best
dust
advice I can give.
See how you feel.
That's exactly
like
right,
it, mate.
Kick up the dust.
Good advice.
I hope it works.
No, I reckon it's spot on. So he starts the book talking about work as art, And then he goes through and tells us how to kind of execute on that, I feel. And he talks a lot about stories, and the stories we tell ourselves.
Mate, do you know about the $5 tooth fairy?
Well, I do, because I've read this book.
Of course you have. So you can't spoil this story, Lockie, but I'm going to tell you about the $5 tooth fairy, because I think it's a great example of the story. So if you or I were strangers, Lockie, and we were catching the subway on our way to a commute to work one day, and I came up to you and said, "Hey, here's $5. Do you want to buy it off me for $1? Chances are you're going to say no, or get the fuck away from me, or I've got to get on this train. And it's probably the train before that you need to get on, but you just got to get away from me at that point in time." And that would be the case with most people. Most people are going to basically brush you off because something is wrong, because the story that we've been told about the random person that comes up to you at the subway station or at the bus stop or anywhere in a public space either wants something from you or is crazy. And so we disengage from that. So then take the example of the $5 tooth fairy, and that is your neighbour is let's say that we're now neighbours, Lockie, and we we know each other a little bit, or we know that each other exists. And each day you go to your letterbox and you find $5 sitting in your letterbox. And this happens for 3 days in a row. And then on the fourth day, I come and knock on your door and I'm holding a $5 note, and you open the door and you say, "Hey, Ryan, what's going on?" And I say, "Do you want to buy this $5 note off me for $1? I've been putting that $5 note in your letterbox for the last 3 days." You're going to say to me, "Sure, Ryan, you're fucking crazy, but yes, I'm in. I'm going to buy that." And the reason is because you know that I'm like, there's something fucking wrong, or I've got too much money, or I'm just really want to give you some money. But I'm not going to like stab you after I do it. And so your story has changed about what it is that I'm doing. And it's so fascinating that, particularly something like in a monetary sense. And I expect that if you went up to someone with a $100 bill and said, "Hey, in the subway station again," and say, "Do you want to buy this $100 bill for $1? You'd probably be just as concerned and probably just as deterred. You'd be like, "No."
Yeah.
And so the importance there is everything revolves around the stories we tell ourselves.
And those stories are built off conditioning from the past in many ways.
Conditioning from the past, and maybe not just your own past, but the past of society and the systems of society that are in place, the paradigm which society finds itself within at the moment.
And so how does this relate to our quest to make work art?
So I think part one is the realization just how much of an important role stories play. And I think maybe stories is also like a synonym for like conditioning. And, you might get into a bit of a space here, mate. It's like the tide of the time. And this might start to come into a little bit of like memetics and different things, which, how the rest of the crowd is acting. But looking at it from like a business perspective, many businesses have been able to take advantage of this idea of stories. And in reality, the best brands are able to take advantage of these stories. So one of the examples he gives in the book is, the idea of Harley Davidson. And you're not buying Harley Davidson because they have the best bikes or because they have the fastest bikes or whatever it is. You're buying Harley Davidson because you want to be part of the Harley Davidson club. You know, you want to be in the inside with all the other Harley Davidson people and the people that ride around with Harley Davidsons.
He loves Harley Davidson.
And what that means.
Doesn't he? He loves it. He's always talking about Harley Davidson.
I bet you it's one of his like other obsessions is like maybe motorcycles, but he like never rides them.
He's never ridden one. Yeah, that kind of thing.
And I think, you know, there's many other companies like, you know, classic case in point like Apple. Apple isn't necessarily about the hardware or the best software. It's about, you know, the fashion item that Apple represents, and you know that you're a developer if you use a MacBook instead of a PC or something.
See, it's
all this story element.
Yeah, it's super interesting. You know, there's a story around every brand. They're probably the most powerful ones, but there's a story about every band, and there's a story that and stories influence your actions. And I think that's kind of how it kind of, I suppose, manifests itself for this kind of idea of work as art, you know, is that what stories are you telling yourself around your work? What stories are you telling yourself about your creativity or your ability to be happy in your work or your ability to make change? Have you really thought it through, you know? And the story you tell yourself about what success is for your work or what type of work you're going to do or what kind of person you are is going to change your actions significantly. And I feel like that's kind of a Tony Robbins thing too, right? But I think that it can be an enabler or you can use it to kind of stop yourself.
Exactly right. Yeah. So you can definitely tell yourself the story that I'm just not good enough to be able to, you know, to be able to do this. And I think that becomes a limiting. There's this idea around like limiting beliefs, and I think there's actually a book called The Big Leap or something like that. It's got like a goldfish on the front cover taking like a leap out of the fishbowl. I can't recall. And there's a few other books that talk about a very similar idea. And yeah, it's just so important, the story that we tell ourselves, because the stories can act in a positive way, like they do for some of those, you know, great brands that we spoke about, but they can also act in a very negative way and frame the way in which we see the world. And so it's about like a reconditioning, which is very much like a Tony Robbins type thing. But I think there's something important there, mate, around honesty. Because I think I suspect, like, again, those companies that we discussed, those brands and those stories wouldn't be as powerful as what they are if they weren't honest about the story, if they didn't believe in the story themselves.
The story, it feels like the story you need to deliver on the story, you know. Like if Harley Davidson's about freedom, then you need to actually kind of show that and do that for all your, I don't know, with all your marketing and all your actions in the business. And if Apple's about beautiful design and sort of that kind of thing, then and just kind of rebellious spirit, then you need to kind of act on that and deliver so it reinforces the story. And so I think, to me, that's the honesty piece, is you can't just say it and not back it up, which can be really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. It doesn't make it easy, but I think the thing that comes to mind here, mate, is you see like the classic like corporate values plastered on a company's website that have almost just been like thrown, slapped there as placeholders to make the company sound great. And we've all seen those companies. But you know that they're not real, or they're not true, or maybe you've worked there and it's nothing like that when you're on the inside. And so I want, like, in the case of those companies, they would be probably still worse off if they were being honest, because sometimes there's like malintention at play, but they're not going to get as far as others who are being honest and displaying those particular things, like say like honesty and performance and integrity, and there's a few other things that you always see across all corporate values.
Yeah, well, words have a lot of stories attached to them too. So new language is quite powerful, I believe. From someone who's like, got a company that really wants to be driven by the values, it's hard to do. Like, it's hard to even sometimes see that you're not doing the right thing, or infuse it through the business and into everybody that's in it, or really articulate what the hell you're trying to do and live up to those things. And like, values
I think what you've said
are
there,
somewhat aspirational.
But I think what you've said there, mate, in itself is like, that's like proof in the pudding, the fact that you're trying, or the fact that you care about that. Whereas I think there's companies out there that they don't really care what those things are as long as they look good.
So you reckon it's the lack of care factor that's really... Yeah, okay, that's interesting. That's quite.
I think it's like we're doing it for face value rather than for what it means and where it guides us along the path, and also just the honesty. Actually being honest with what those things are. Because I can definitely, because when you're talking like a value, it's like, what impact is this value? How can you possibly see, if you kind of switch out a value here for a different value here, about the impact that that's going to have down the line on the trajectory for the business, or the path that the business ends up taking? And it's really tough a really tough decision to make. And I think just caring about that and putting effort into that, I think that's a strong part of the way there.
Yeah.
In itself, Because I think it means that you want to embody that within the organisation, wherever they end up.
Yeah, I suppose at least you're giving it a crack.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it probably brings us into our next discussion around credibility, doesn't it? Like, so.
How do you get credibility, Lockie?
Do great work, maybe. I think is my answer. You put me on the spot a little. But we can't just like wake up in the morning and do great work. We can't wake up day one and do great work. You don't get it at the start. Maybe that's a better way to put it. You get it after you've practiced a heap and failed a bunch of times and slowly gotten better and taken many leaps and felt vulnerable and all those things. And then at the end, you might get some.
How do you go with imposter syndrome?
It's a very much a ever present in my life. Yeah, ever present. I feel it every day, I think.
I can't imagine there's too many people that don't fall within that category. Maybe there's some people that are strong-headed enough or arrogant enough to think otherwise, but
I'd probably broaden it out to like just feeling scared. You know, like I think a lot of the time I just feel scared about things, and I don't necessarily realize it, but I'm avoiding things because I'm scared of them. I've got some fear around it. And that's got a lot to do with, you know, things that you should do but you don't are usually based around some sort of fear, I think, at least for me. And so I think I've noticed that, and I think that's kind of part of imposter syndrome as well, is that feeling of, oh, God, I don't know what I'm doing. What does that mean, you know? And no matter how many times you get told that everyone feels that way, it doesn't really feel like it, you know? So I'm not...
It doesn't make it any easier.
That hasn't helped me that much. I think it's just a thing where you've just got to do your best to recognize how you're feeling in the moment and try and feel like, do you want to push through it or don't you? Make that decision. I don't know. I don't really have any good insight there for me. I wouldn't be able to give advice on it, that's for sure. Just trying to reflect on my own experience. I
was banking on you, mate, because you're going to solve all my problems. I think a big part of it, right, is comparison, and it's almost like a story of comparison. So when you're in year 9 doing, I don't know what you fucking do in year 9 maths, but algebra or something, you're comparing to like the whiz bang algebra guy in the class, who, you know, is getting 100% on every single test, because there's always that person in your class. And then like you progress your way through school, and then for whatever reason you decide to go into engineering, and you know, you're at university and you're in these mixed classes doing, I don't know, calculus or something, and you're actually comparing yourself against, say, some of the best engineers in your class, and then you're comparing yourself against, there's probably maybe a couple of like maths degree people in there as well, studying maths degrees. Not to mention that guy that might have been studying maths back in year 9 algebra has now gone off and he might be studying something completely different. He might have gone on to do outdoor education or something, and he has nothing to do with maths now, and you've probably even surpassed him. So your original comparison is like totally fallen over. And then for whatever reason you decide to continue to study maths and, you know, and move out into like a postdoctorate thing or like a PhD in maths. And now you're comparing yourself to like these professors in maths, and all the way along you're still feeling like an imposter, because there's always someone that is better than you, because you're comparing yourself to a different group of people every single time that you progress your way along the journey yourself. And I think that's certainly a way that I see imposter syndrome. You kind of just keep resetting the benchmark, no matter where it is, whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, and it's hard to recognize that you've actually gotten better as well.
Yeah.
If you don't make some time for it, I feel like that. Yeah, that's quite insightful. But it kind of shows, your example is, you know, this is something Seth talks about around getting through this and doing your work as art, is that, you know, Stephen Pressfield-esque, you don't need to feel like you're in the right creative headspace to do it. You just got to do it. You show up and do a little bit. Doesn't matter if it sucks. The win is, the story you need to tell yourself is, I've won because I did it, my work today. And another interesting thing that you've noted that I actually didn't pick this up. I must have missed it in the book because it didn't stick with me, but it's so good, is whoever fails most wins. There is a little bit of nuance to this. It's a lovely little catchphrase, but
could have almost been the catchphrase. What is it? The whoever dares wins. What was that show?
Who Dares Wins. Mike Whitney.
Who Dares Wins.
Yeah. No, that was great.
Mate. You're straight onto it.
Oh, well, that
can rely on you to remember a name.
That's it. So, but I guess it's like you've got to fail in a way that caps the downside. You can fail once and lose everything. But
the scary reality of that is, mate, if you're in if you're in the space of like base jumping, a failure in that space can be the last failure that you ever make in anything, because it's a pretty high risk space. But the point of that is there's many ways that you could fail that end up causing ruin. And shit, we almost got through a full episode without mentioning him. But this is what Taleb always talks about, which is risk of ruin and avoiding risk of ruin being, one of the most important things, and which is why like things like precautionary principle come into play, which means like doing little things or little that seemingly insignificant things that actually make a huge impact from a risk, from your own risk profile and whatever. So avoid failure. Avoid ruinous failure.
But if you don't put yourself in a position where you'll stuff it up, you won't really learn anything. When you were talking there, I was thinking like, is part of our issue that the biggest thing we're trying to avoid is dying, right? Most of our systems are set up to avoid dying. And do we treat other problems a bit like that too often? What is the real risk of what you're about to do?
I think that's really interesting, mate. I think a lot of it ties back to the lizard brain, because a lot of the stuff that we associate with now is like us trying to, where like the fucking the seismometer's going out of control internally. It stems from stuff that's been programmed biologically thousands of years ago, where it actually probably did have a life or death outcome from it. Like classic case in point is like fight or flight, when you're in like a mild debate with someone and all of a sudden everything flares up out of control. And
I think we've all felt that one.
And things are said that you wish weren't said. But like back in the day, if a cougar was in front of you, you need to have that so you can get away.
Interesting choice of animal. You would.
Yeah.
Yes. I like the idea around that he has about separating yourself from your work. You are not your work. You are not the business you're running. You are not the art you've put up. And that is so hard. But
yeah,
there's freedom in that.
You can't feel the javelin to your own heart. It's a javelin to the product or to the piece of work that you've made, and it just didn't land that time for whatever reason. What I find interesting in that space, mate, is there's people that totally disregard the criticism and just keep on their like merry way, and they keep kind of pursuing in that merry way. And there's some people that like take that criticism on, and sometimes both paths end up in very like fruitful outcomes, I wonder if you've got any insights to glean for us there, mate.
Oh, that's tricky. I think it comes back to most people who end up making creative things that are popular have a very, very good understanding of the world they're playing in, regardless if they take the criticism on or not. They're experts at they watch other people's films or art, or they're immersed in the world that they're in, so they kind of got a feel for it anyway. So they can follow their own gut, I reckon. So they're getting a feedback loop, but they just might go, you know what, I don't give a shit about your criticism or whatever. I'm keep going this path. And then I think the other side is that there's the people that take it on probably do refine and use it as a thing to refine it if they keep going. But there's also an element of luck. Like the guy who ignores everyone might create something that's just great. Maybe even just because they're brilliant or by chance, So it's hard to know.
And that's really interesting, mate, because it adds noise to the pile effectively, because it only takes a couple of those situations for people to start creating their own correlations to people who gave total fucking disregard for everything else going on around them, got this incredible outcome. Whereas it could just be simply noise in the system, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So, mate, you want to talk about superpowers?
Yeah, so this will be quick because we are running long. But I think throughout this and throughout a few of our previous episodes, and maybe we'll expand this on the next abstract chat, but I think there's a number of things that these kind of creative people do that are superpowers, and they make themselves it makes them kind of attractive to other people, but outsiders too. And one, I think I've got a few thoughts on this. So the first one is that they're willing to embrace and push change. They're willing to really mix things up quite often and all the time, And your idea of Miles Davis was a good one. He kept changing his style throughout his whole life. They are able to take and sustain failure, which we've mentioned above, and they are able to keep going, I'm reading this Andy Warhol biography at the moment, which I'd love to talk about one day. It's going to take me a year to finish it, but, his fine art was widely rejected for 15 years, and, it's a really detailed biography, and he became quite a popular illustrator, but no one gave a crap about his other work. And it took him a long time to get his work to the point where he was doing this pop art. All his other stuff was kind of like, everyone was just like, whatever, And so if you think about pursuing that for 15 years, how long that actually is,
Well, mate, he's classic case in point of that long-term horizon artist that we were talking about earlier on. And it's like that leap, like imagine that initial leap that he took at some particular age, whatever it was, where he started doing this stuff. And that leap kind of doesn't hit its first like landing point until 15 years down the track. That's crazy. 15 years is such a long time.
I give up on stuff after a few weeks. So I think the other thing that they end things. They end to change is to end something, to move something into the past. So they end their current style that's incredibly popular at the time that it's incredibly popular. They end relationships. They end bands. They end things when they need to move on. And they're constantly moving. I'm not sure that's... In my mind, a lot of them do that too much to be happy, but it does help with the creative process. But I think that there's a healthy amount of like not hanging on to stuff,
There's like a saying no. There's that, very much that. Well, it's almost like a separate thing actually, because maybe something that's not quite in here, mate, is that disagreeable nature. But the disagreeable nature comes from like the pursuit of what they're trying to do, and if it gets in the way of that, then I'm not interested. No. Yeah. Which is maybe something different to what you're talking about. You're kind of talking about the progression to the next thing.
Yeah, there's something harder about. Imagine you've created this amazing style of song or something, and you go around, maybe Dylan plugging in the electric guitar is a good example here. He could have gone around for the next 15 years playing folk music and being the most loved person in America, but instead he chose to go around and get booed and heckled off stage. Like, that's intense.
Mate, he could have also gone, like, because he rose to absolute stardom post that electric period, and he could have gone on and continued that very period onwards, and done like the Rolling Stones, and just kept playing the same tunes until he was 100 years old. But instead, he kept like pursuing that insanely artistic journey, which we discussed in the Royal Review episode.
I was thinking about him the other day.
Rolling Thunder Review.
Yeah, because I watched this documentary on Netflix about this lady. It's called The B-Sides, and she takes these fantastic photos with I've been getting obsessed with artists, you can probably tell. She takes these fantastic photos with this giant Polaroid camera. It's huge. It's like, half a person size Polaroid, and creates these amazing photographs. And she was like very close.
This is now or like 50 years ago?
She's been doing it for like almost 50 years. And she was very good friends with Allen Ginsberg, the poet. And she just like revered Ginsberg, as so many did, I found out through that time. He was the poet of a generation, and a brilliant, brilliant man who created this amazing art, and this guy's like a really central figure in her life. And I just remembered the Bob Dylan documentary where it's like, Ginsberg was just like a groupie. He basically wasn't a good songwriter either, Yeah, he was a good poet, but, he was just kind of hanging around me, like it's just like, who the fuck is this guy?
This is Dylan's disregard for Ginsberg.
Yeah. So,
or not disregard, just like lax nature about him. He was just a guy hanging around.
He's indifferent. Like, it's like, yeah, I was just there making me music, Yeah. So, and then Francis Molman does this. He's able to end when his proteges get to the point and he tells them to go, and he brings new energy in. Miles Davis did that a lot. They mixed things up. He did it with
the train, mate. He did it with the train.
Yeah.
He moved John Coltrane on to the next thing.
Moved the train on. That might have been partly to do with his heroin addiction, but no, I think actually at that point it wasn't. That was where he was ready to go. Yeah, sorry. And then
it evolved.
My last point for now, and I'll work on this idea before the next abstract chat, is that these real change makers they're at peace with being in exile, which is beautifully put by yourself, tweaking my words earlier. They're happy to be on the outside, and they kind of, the changes they make keep them there, but it's very, they find a way, they create strong emotion, but they're respected if they get it right, and that keeps them out on the edge, they keep out on the edge, and they're not there to necessarily be liked, but to kind of provoke your thoughts. So I thought that those things really embody the artist maybe in a way of operating and acting. And I think that those four or five things, if you can incorporate those, I believe, I'm thinking about this myself, if I can do a bit of those, it'll really going to help me find my own art, or it'll help me be happy if I can keep working on those things. So
I like it, mate. I like it. The one thing I'd think I'd group them all within is this idea of like the artistic vision, and kind of wrap them all in within that as though they're all on the pursuit of that artistic vision. That's like the guiding compass that these behaviors are all kind of come out from as a result of. And you know, when we say vision isn't I've got the exact definition or the exact words for what it is that I'm trying to do here. It's something that you like feel. It's something very much in the gut.
It's not static.
And I think it's not static. No, not at all. And I think that very much resonates with all those things that you've hit on there, mate. I'm excited for us to dig into that and flesh it out.
Well, now I've committed to doing some work. That's a shame.
I'll do some work and finish off with a closing quote for us, mate. How about that?
Sounds good.
So this is something towards the end of the book with Seth, and a nice way to round off the leap. So when you're sitting right on the edge of something daring and scary and creative and powerful and perhaps wonderful, and you blink and take a step back, that's the moment. The moment between you and remarkable. Most people blink. Most people get stuck. All the preparation, daring, and hard work is nothing compared with the ability to not blink. And the only person that can decide that is you.
What a great way to end. What a great way to end with a challenge. I like it.
That's good, mate. And also don't forget that you can check out full episodes with video from our show on YouTube.
Never forget.
And check out never forget. And check out our website, abstractable.co. So thanks for listening.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Cheers.